This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. This time around, I'm looking at the Wall creature type. The Wall type is one of the more interesting histories of any creature type. This is because there used to be unique rules that applied to walls, and that was that they just couldn't attack. This makes sense because, walls don't tend to be very mobile or aggressive, but this creature type having its own special rules meant that cards like Mistform Mutant had to specifically exclude the Wall type, because if you used a card to make a creature gain the Wall type, that meant it suddenly couldn't attack. You'll note, too, that Mistform Mutant can't make things into legends either, because that used to be a creature type and not a super type, and it had its own rules baggage too. Funnily enough, cards like the Mutant still can't make creatures gain the Wall type, even though that type no longer comes with rules baggage. They just haven't changed the errata on cards like that. That might be something they change in the future, though. But yeah, this is also why older walls don't have Defender printed on the card, because the rules just said they couldn't attack. Beginning with Champions of Kamigawa in 2004, the Can't Attack rules text being associated with the Wall type was retired, and the Defender mechanic was created, which had the same effect. Doing this meant that Wizards could more easily design non-walls that couldn't attack, and slap Defender on all walls too. Still, even if the Wall type no longer instantly means that a creature can't attack, walls still all have Defender, and they tend to have high toughness and low power. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have the Wall creature type, or be able to make a Wall creature token. In all, that means 139 cards were eligible for this list, and in this video, we'll talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it's Wall of Junk. If you look at Wall of Junk in a vacuum, it seems pretty bad. Sure, a 0/7 for 2 will do a good job of slowing your opponent down on the ground, or at least it would, if it didn't also return to your hand every single turn. Having to cast this over and over again doesn't sound particularly appealing. However, luckily for Wall of Junk, it was printed in Urza's Saga, a block with lots of strong artifact payoffs, and that helped lead to it being played in block constructed. Lots of decks in that format had a game plan built around the super powerful Tinker and Goblin Welder, and Wall of Junk provided decks interested in those shenanigans with a cheap artifact that could slow down the opponent, while also giving you an artifact that you can sacrifice to Tinker or Goblin Welder in the early game to search up or reanimate a big scary artifact. Wall of Junk never gained any points after 1999, so future Walls could easily bump it off this list. At number 9, it's Glacial Wall, which has an identical score to Wall of Junk down to the 2 Pro Tour top 8s, but I gave Glacial Wall the edge because its average finish at those events was higher. Glacial Wall gained all 4 of its points at the World Championship in 2001, where it was played in opposition decks. Those decks looked to get lots of creatures out to then lock the opponent out of the game. Glacial Wall was useful here because you generally weren't always able to just lock down all of their creatures. So it provided an early blocker as you built your board, and having a 0/7 in play also meant that you could just tap down your opponent's creatures who might have a good attack, and let them still have their 3/3 or whatever, which wasn't going to get through the Glacial Wall. At number 8, it's Shield Sphere, the third straight wall with 4 points coming from 2 Pro Tour top 8s. I gave it the highest slot of the 3 because its average place at its Pro Tour top 8s was the highest. Shield Sphere is a 0-mana artifact, and most of those find a way to see some play, since getting something for no mana at all tends to be pretty sweet. As a 0/6, you're even getting a somewhat impactful creature. It does get smaller every time it blocks, but that's okay. Unlike Glacial Wall and Wall of Junk, Shield Sphere did not gain all of its points at the same event. Instead, it has 2 top 8s that are separated by about a decade. The first one came in 1999 in an extended combo deck called Cocoa Pebbles, which utilized Goblin Bombardment and Enduring Renewal and a bunch of zero-cost creatures, like Shield Sphere, to kill the opponent. You played the sphere, sacrificed it to the Bombardment, and Enduring Renewal returns it to your hand, and you repeat until your opponent has no life. The second top 8 came in a Legacy Survival of the Fittest decks. These decks tend to run lots of singleton copies of things to tutor up, and this version of Survival was really focused on Vengevine. You could discard Vengevine to survival and then search up Shield Sphere, which will make it pretty darn easy for you to cast 2 creature spells in the early game with a Vengevine or Vengevines coming into play very, very early. At number 7, it is Wall of Frost. This 0/7 wall taps down creatures it blocks, which is a pretty nice way to further slow down your opponent. The wall has been printed several times, but it gained all of its points in Theros Standard, where it was a useful sideboard card for Devotion to Blue decks, which could bring it in against aggressive opponents, and also benefit from the 2 mana symbols in the cost because it made cards like Master of Waves more potent. At number 6, it is Wall of Reverence. It has an identical score to Wall of Frost, but it had a higher average finish, so I gave it the edge. This has flying and impressive defensive stats, but the fact that it gains you life every turn is what really makes it appealing. This is the kind of card that aggressive decks have nightmares about. It was played mainboard in 5-color control decks in Standard, and as a sideboard card in decks like Naya Midrange and Revelark. At number 5, it's Overgrown Battlement, the only card on this list that is a wall payoff. Well, it's actually a defender payoff, but all walls have defender, so yeah. If you're playing several creatures with defender, Overgrown Battlement can produce some pretty significant mana for you, and even all on its own, it can tap for 1 green. Just as you would expect, the Battlement has been played in ramp decks. In Standard, this included Valakut and Eldrazi ramp, and it picked up its lone Pro Tour top 8 in the Modern format in a Breach Post deck. At number 4, it is Stinging Barrier, a 0/4 wall that can ping for 1 blue mana. The barrier doesn't seem super impressive at first glance, but due to the metagames it was part of, it managed to gain 8 points. Mask's Block was a format entirely dominated by Rebels, a deck which sought to get a Rebel into play like Ramosian Sergeant, and then use it to search up other Rebels. Each Rebel had a similar ability, so you could go all the way up the chain with a bunch of Rebels summoning each other out of your deck. The barrier gave you a way to interrupt this chain by killing some of the smaller Rebels, like the Sergeant. Most Rebels were pretty small too, and the barrier was a pretty good, barrier against them. At the Mask's Block Pro Tour in 2000, 6 of the top 8 decks were Rebels, but the 2 decks that weren't Rebel decks were mono blue decks largely designed to combat the Rebels, and Stinging Barrier was a very real part of their plan, with both decks running a full 4 copies in the main deck. Having a repeatable way to kill little Rebels was important against a deck with repeatable ways to get extra creatures. The barrier was also played in Standard, but it wasn't quite as important there, as it was just a sideboard card against Rebels and other problematic weenie decks. At number 3, it is the Birth of Melitus, which is by far the newest card to find its way onto this list. It's a saga that gives you something different 3 turns in a row. When you play it, you get to search up basic planes. After your next draw step, you get a 0/4 wall, which is what allowed it to make this list. And then on the next draw step, you gain 2 life. These 3 things are all pretty small, but for the mana investment, you're actually getting quite a lot. In Standard, it has been played in blue-white control and Fires of Invention decks. The card works really well in both of those, because both really need to hit their early land drops, and they need some help to get to the point where they can take over the game, and Birth accomplishes all of those things for them. It also gained 2 points from Pioneer Fires of Invention decks. Fires of Invention was ultimately banned, but Birth is still in Standard, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it gain a few more points going forward. It may have a real shot at moving up this list. At number 2, I have 2 cards, Wall of Blossoms and Wall of Omens. I put them together here because they do the same thing. Wall of Blossoms is the older card, and Wall of Omens is just a color-shifted Wall of Blossoms. Wall of Omens is a legitimate number 2, while Wall of Blossoms would have been number 3 if I gave it its own slot. With both of these, you get a 0/4 wall that draws you a card, and that's pretty nice. Kind of similar to the Birth of Melitus, actually. By getting the defensive body, you are very likely to buy extra time to take advantage of the new card you get. Let's talk about Wall of Blossoms first because it is the older card. In Standard, it was played in the Recurring Survival combo deck, where it can help you draw into your combo pieces. It was also played in a variety of decks in Extended, including Black, Green, Midrange, and various combo decks. Wall of Omens has been played in Standard, Modern, and Extended, with most of its points in all 3 of those formats coming in blue-white control decks. And at number 1, by a lot, it's Wall of Roots, a wall that helps you ramp. It's a pretty nice card because it can help you live long enough to take advantage of that extra mana, and it also makes that mana. It was played both times it was in Standard, in ramp decks as you would expect. It was also played in a variety of extended decks including Life from the Loam and The Rock. It also has a single point in Legacy from back in 2005 where it was played in a Recurring Survival deck. Modern is where it has found the most success, though. It was played in most versions of Birthing Pod, a toolbox deck that also ran some easy-to-assemble combos, and the Wall was nice for the deck because it could be used to help you go off with the pod sooner, and then you could sacrifice it to the pod once its usefulness was done. Birthing Pod was eventually banned in Modern, but Wall of Roots has continued seeing play in its spiritual successor, which is a toolbox deck that runs Collected Company and Court of Calling instead of Birthing Pod. It doesn't have any points since 2019, but it has a significant lead, and it will probably remain number 1 on this list. Well, those are the 10 walls that have left the biggest mark on competitive Magic. If you're interested in owning any of the walls featured in this video, you can find direct links in the description that will take you to each of them within the Card Kingdom store. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you stay aware of future videos, please subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. Additionally, if you like hearing me talk about Magic, consider checking out my other YouTube channel, Need to Hone History. A link to that channel should be on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.